Are okay. All right, so today's general introduction to the Hebrew goddesses. I wish this would stay in a way that I like it. Oh my God. Here. Okay, good. All right, so just going to introduce in general, right, what I mean by the Hebrew goddesses. Obviously, we don't have actual Hebrew goddesses, right? So what do I mean by that, right? What am I trying to say? So we'll do this today, and then next time we'll do the introduction to the Book of Ruth. So as we enter this section, right, I need to prepare you a little bit because I know I prepared you already for wisdom literature, but this is like next level, next level of problematic, next level of traumatic, next level of shocking, right? So I need to do a tiny bit, a few words on this. First of all, I want to be very clear that as we enter this topic, right, we are really entering sacred ground, right? This is not a topic that, this is as sacred, I believe, this section, as the Day of Atonement in the Hebrew religion, right? This is, in the Hebrew religion, you have the most sacred day, which is the Day of Repentance, where you fast and you really, right? This section is as sacred, right? We need to really enter it with a lot of respect, with a lot of attentiveness, right? And simply, right, with a willingness to listen and hear out, right, what is being spoken. And I would, so in this class, right, in this next section, I will ask you, right, to take off your shoes, right? This is what we do in the Hebrew Bible when we are on sacred ground, right? Like Moses, when he was in the presence of the burning bush, right? God said, take off your shoes. What does it mean to take off the shoes? Let's talk a little bit about that, since I'm asking you to do that. It's of course, it's a metaphor, right? What do you think it means when God asks Moses to take off his shoes in front of the burning bush? Because that's what I'm asking you to do now. Olivera, go ahead.
I would assume that would be something like when you come into your house, especially if you live on a place like New York, you leave your shoes at the door because it comes with like a lot of things from outside, and your house is like where you want to be and you want it to be a clean space. So it's kind of you keep it sacred.
Okay, I like that. That's a great interpretation that you leave all of the outside stuff, right? So, in other words, you leave all of what you already know, what you've already understood, right? We've talked about this aspect already, right? About trying to leave behind whatever preconceptions you have on the topic. But there's also another reason why we take off the shoes. Ram, go ahead.
Out of sheer respect, the respect of your home, the respect of God,
Right.
respect, respectfully.
Absolutely. You're not treading all over it like it's your territory, right? To take off the shoes when you enter a home is, in a way, is saying this is your home and I am treading lightly, right? I'm not taking over with my boots, right? It's a way of saying I am not at home here, and so I'm going to make myself small, right? This is great. Any other interpretations of taking off the shoes? Um, Okay. Yeah, this covers it pretty much for me, right? So what I'm going to ask you in this particular section, because this is a section, to be honest, that I haven't heard taught, right? I have never heard the Bible taught in this way. So this is completely new also for me, right? Um, and we need to learn to simply, when we enter this space that we're about to enter, which is going to take a few weeks, right? I'm asking you to take off your shoes, meaning you're not at home, you're being polite, you're not taking over, and you don't know. Right? You don't know how things work here. This is a new household, right? Of course, in your house, I will take off my shoes, right? But now in this particular house, this is a different house. Right? This is akin to, in the Hebrew Bible, we have the father's house that is often mentioned, and we have the mother's house, right? We are used to worshiping in the father's house, right? Women included, right? We are used to being in a kind of a very different setting than what is natural to us, right? Now we're entering the mother's house, right? It's a different worldview, it's a different mindset, it's a different approach, which is just as holy as the father's house, right? So that's the first thing I will ask of you. Are you ready? Put your hand in the screen if you're ready to take off your shoes. Okay, great. All right. Now, it's interesting. I don't know if you noticed in the text of Inanna, when she said she placed her ear towards, was it towards the kingdom of Enki? or maybe towards the underworld. The ear, right, is in the writings of Inanna, and also in the Hebrew Bible signifies intelligence, actually, right? So to be smart, the place of intelligence in the Hebrew Bible is not the brain, is the ear, right? So a sign of intelligence, especially in wisdom literature, is the ability to listen, not to talk, right? So this is kind of also good for us to practice, simply listening and hearing the whole thing out and entering this new space and you know, taking off our shoes. Okay, so let's begin. All right, so first of all, we mentioned, right, that I'm talking here about the Hebrew goddesses. Why did I choose to spend so much time on this? For two reasons. There are two main reasons why I wanted to have a whole section on this. Number one, this section will open up a different way of being spiritual, right? There has been the way that has been taught for centuries, which is what I call the patriarchal way, the father's house, right? We have been all sitting for centuries now in the father's house, in a male constructed form of spirituality, right? And this is, I will show you how in a second, right? But women included, we are always in the background in that context. We're never really sitting in the father's house. We're always, you know, on the balcony or behind some wall, right? But, right, we have been taking part to this form of spirituality, which has been set in the father's house. But there is a different approach, right, which we have not really explored, and which we need as women to explore in order to discover our particular path to God, right? Now, to be fair, in Judaism, not so much in the Hebrew Bible, but in the practice of Judaism, there is a clear separation between the way men practice spirituality and the way women practice spirituality. So there's already this understanding in Judaism. For example, the men they are supposed to be keeping all these commandments, not the woman, right? She has other things, right, that she needs to be doing. Different set of commandments, right? Different criteria. So we already have this. So first reason why I want us to learn about these Hebrew goddesses, like I call them, is to discover a new way of connecting to God, a new way of being spiritual, one that is more tuned to the feminine, right? Now, for men in the class, this is good too, right? Because this is what gives us a complete picture of God, right? If we only have the male perspective, we don't have the image of God, right? The image of God is made up of the masculine and the feminine. So we know very well the masculine perspective, and now I would like to open up the feminine perspective, not only for us women to discover ourselves and our own unique spiritual journey, but for everyone to have finally a clear vision, or a more clear, more complete vision of who God is, right? So let's talk a little bit about this father's house. I'm going to compare the two today. I'm going to compare the father's house and the mother's house, the father's approach to spirituality and the mother's approach, right? The male approach and the female approach. And the male approach you will immediately recognize, because we have been sitting in this house for all our lives, pretty much. So first of all, I'm going to have 4 main points that I will, 4 main points of contrast, right? Between the two houses, right? So let me write this in my notes, because this is new, so I remember. Okay, so first point, I will be talking about the metaphors for God. Number 2, I'll talk about sacred spaces. Number 3, I'll talk about rituals. And number 4, I'll talk about commandments. Okay, this is really the 4 main aspects, right, that I will be contrasting, how it's done in the father's house, how it's done in the mother's house, right? Okay, so first thing we see, if you have grown up, as all of us have actually, in a patriarchal setting, you know that most of the metaphors for God are male, right? There are in the Hebrew Bible plenty of metaphors describing God as a female, in the sense that God is seen as having a womb, right? God is seen sometimes as weeping over, as giving birth, right? God is seen as a female hen, right? Protecting her chicks. So we have plenty of metaphors, but in general, God is seen and visioned, and I'm sure most of us, if you look into your imaginary, when you try to picture God, it's a big male with a beard, powerful, sitting on a throne, a warrior, right? Most of, even me, right? I'm doing a class on this. I still address God as male, right? And I'm perfectly comfortable, right? So we have seen God is mostly seen as male. He is addressed with the pronoun he. Right? Never. I mean, it would be shocking to start praying God as a she. And yet, why not? Like when I think about, I mean, I even can't do it because I'm so conditioned, right? But why not? We call God Father. Why not Mother, right? If God is supposed to be like we saw in Genesis 1, right? If the image of God is only complete when you have the male and the female. Remember Genesis 1, right? Put your hand on the screen if you're following, right? Genesis 1, when it says male and female, he created them in the image of God, male and female, he. So in other words, it's the image of God we saw. It has to do with this kind of balance, right? God is seen clearly only when both the male and the female are present, right? And yet for centuries we have simply seen the male, right? Father, warrior, even when in Christianity, right? Jesus is male, right? So we are so used to seeing, and we would never dare start talking about God in the she, feminine, right? It would feel blasphemous, right? And yet, why not, right? If we're going to reduce God to a gender like we've been doing, why not reduce him? There's right. It's just as bad to reduce him, or good, right? So that's the first thing, right? Now the second thing, so that's the father's house, right? And God is seen as a male. Now where we're going in the mother's house, right, where we're going to encounter these three fabulous women, right? The Shulamit. Let me write down their names so you can already get acquainted. When I say the Shulamit, this is the name of the woman in the Song of Songs. She doesn't have a name. She's called the Shulamit, right? And then we have Esther in the book of Esther, and then we have Ruth in the book of Ruth, right? These are the three, I call them Hebrew goddesses, right? They're not divine. They're not obviously deities, but why I call them goddesses is because they are the embodiment of what I consider to be the divine feminine, right? In other words, God is revealing himself or herself. I'm going to stick to the him for now for simplicity's purposes, right? But it seems that God is revealing himself or something about his nature through these women. These women in very powerful ways are the embodiment of certain divine attributes. So in that sense, I see them as the embodiment of the divine feminine, different attributes than the male God, right? And so we have, what we're going to have in this mother's house is encounter these three powerful women and these three embodiments of the divine feminine, i.e. these three goddesses, right? Like I like to call them. But let's be clear, right? When I mean goddesses, I don't mean deities, I mean embodiment of the divine feminine, right? Okay, so in the mother's house, we will see the opposite. God will be actually very explicitly moving through these women. In other words, these women will, their way of dwelling in the world will give us a vision of who God is. So these women in many ways are the epiphany of God, right? They are the manifestation of God. They are, you can even go as far as to say, the incarnation of God, right? Of well, not God, but of certain divine attributes yeah, I'll leave it to that. Certain divine attributes, right? I'm not going to go into the debate whether God can incarnate or not. We'll save that for the book of John, Gospel of John. Okay, so that's the first thing. So we will be, especially we'll see Ruth, the Shulamit, and Esther. The way that I'm reading the journeys of these women is as a powerful manifestation of the divine feminine, of certain attributes of God, right? Okay. Second, moving to the second point, the sacred spaces, right? So in the Father's house, where is the sacred space? Anybody know? Where would you, let me get you involved. Where is the central space where we have to go in order to encounter God in the Father's house, in the patriarchal context, Hebrew patriarchal? Granit, go ahead.
Would it be like the tabernacle or the temple?
Exactly, right? Jerusalem, the temple, right? So there is a space that is built, right? Here is everything. Here is where you come if you want to come near God, right? Now in the mother's house, in this new context, right? You leave the walls of Jerusalem every single one of these stories is intentionally happening, except Esther. Well, Esther, first of all, outside of Jerusalem. They're all outside, right? So Esther is not even in the land of Israel. Esther is in exile, right? Esther is happening in the Empire of Persia. But the other ones, they're outside of Jerusalem in the fields, both, right? The Song of Songs is situated in some nature, wilderness, right? Natural setting, villages mentioned in the Song of Songs. And Ruth is situated during the barley harvest, right? Everything is taking place in the fields when it comes to Ruth, right? So you have a different setting, which is natural, right? This is a more natural setting. And yet, in this setting, you have powerful moments of encounters through which God is revealed, right? God is not encountered directly. God in these texts is not encountered vertically. Let me make this very precise, right? When you go to the temple, you're there, the altar, and God is somewhere up there, right? And you try to bring God down through your prayers. In these texts, God is met between people. God is encountered on the horizontal level, right? God is now, you will have manifestations of God between, right? Between people. It is in the encounter between Ruth and Boaz that God is revealed, between the Shulamite and her lover that God is revealed, between Esther and the king that God is revealed, right? So we're shifting now outside of the walls of Jerusalem into the fields, right? From the religious to the mundane, right? From the extraordinary to the ordinary, and we'll come back to that. This is a different setting, more natural setting. Okay, now, third was the rituals, right? How did I call it? Rituals, just rituals. Okay. So rituals, what is the main ritual? What is the main thing that is taking place in the temple? In the Hebrew context, what's the main thing they're doing, the most important task of the priest in the temple? Go ahead, King.
Is it giving the Eucharist, or is it just letting God enter?
So you're in the church. I'm talking about the temple in the Hebrew Bible. No Eucharist yet. So what's happening in the Hebrew Bible in the temple? I see a couple hands. Let's see. I can never find my way around these hands. Kestenbaum, go ahead.
It was sacrifices, specifically animal sacrifices. That was considered the main avoda, the main task of the priests.
Excellent, right? And by the way, this is one of the reasons, right, that women were not allowed into the priesthood. This is one issue that has been debated, why women cannot be priests. The simple reason. The role of the priest was to be a butcher, basically kill the animal, tear it apart, haul it on the altar, and and this, because the woman, not because she's not strong enough, right? I'll be very precise, not because she's not strong enough, but because the woman is seen in the Hebrew tradition as the mother of life, and because in the Hebrew tradition there's an important separation that is made between life and death. They have to be kept separate, right? Whether it's in the way they eat, the way they dress, there is this intention to keep life and death separate. Because they have to be separate, the woman who is the life giver cannot be involved in this kind of butchery, right? That's the idea. So this is one of the main reasons, right, that has been argued by commentators, that why women were not priests, whereas women were prophets, they were teachers, they were seers, they were judges. You have women in every single role, queens, right? But except that one, right? And this is the reason, because women, because of their connection to life, cannot be mingled with this activity, which is entirely focused on death, right? So we kind of fantasize about. I mean, we kind of imagine in a Walt Disney way what the temple looked like, but you have to realize there were huge oxen being butchered. There was blood all over the place. It was terrible, right? This was really something traumatic going on, right? Animals were killed every single day. So you have kind of really a religion centered on the death of the animal, right? Or even more specifically on death. You have similar continuation in Christianity, I have to say, right? When you enter a church, what's the first thing you see? A crucifix, paf, right? Dead person on a cross, right? So we've kind of followed in this both Judaism and Christianity, in a way, have had this kind of central place given to sacrifice and death, right? And women are excluded. Obviously, we see why in Judaism, right? So what we're going to see now in the mother's house is very different. The central ritual will be sexuality, right? In other words, what we call the sacred marriage. This is the place, right? Whereas in the father's house, the altar, where the animal is sacrificed, is the place where we encounter God. Going to the mother's house is the bedroom, right? Where the man and the woman are making love. And this is where you have powerful encounter with the divine, right? As we saw with Inanna, right? I'll come back to that. So this is the place where some of you would be like, what? That doesn't make sense. So I'll go very deep, right? Well, that's what we'll be studying mostly, is this notion of the sacred marriage, of the sexual encounter between the man and the woman, and how there is something profoundly spiritual taking place at that moment, right? So are you following the shift from the altar to the bedroom, right? This is kind of unusual. We're not used to hearing this, right? This is very different from what we're used to. It's scary, right? So we have this idea, right? And I'll talk more. I will go deeper today into this notion of the sacred marriage and why it is seen as like the place of the altar, right? This is the space we're going to see where spiritual transformation is taking place, right? And I'll talk more about that in a second. Okay, so now we go to the last one, and this is also something problematic, right? Which even the rabbis struggled with as they read these texts. If you read at the rabbinic commentary of Song of Songs, the Book of Ruth, the Book of Esther, you are sensing throughout a massive collective discomfort with what is taking place, right? Between the Shulamite and her lover, between Ruth and Boaz, and between Esther and the king, there is a lot of discomfort about what is going on. And of course, we'll go into that. But first thing we see, right, we talk about, that's the last point, in the Father's house, we have the commandments, fundamental, right? I mean, God really revealed himself through a command. That was the first encounter between the Hebrews as a collective entity and God, was a contract with a bunch of commands, right? So there is a huge emphasis in the Father's house, whether it's Christianity or Judaism, and probably Islam too. By the way, we can include Islam in all of what we are saying. I know I'm only saying Judaism and Christianity, but Islam is a cousin religion. It's the same, right? Same, the Father's house is also very present in Islam, right? So this whole emphasis on the law, I mean, just look at the definition of just to go to Islam briefly, right? Definition of a Muslim is what? Submissive. Submissive to what? Submissive to God. Through what? The commandments, right? If you look at Judaism, the amount of time that is spent studying the law is like, it's exponential compared to other things, right? This was maybe the reaction of a movement in the 19th century called Hasidism, which was like, you know, we need to focus on other things. We can't just be, right, focusing on the law all the time. There's more things going on. So we did have, in all three fathers' houses, by the way, there have been moments of subversion, inner subversion. I would say, if you want to know a little bit, right, Islam, you have Sufism, which is a subversion of this emphasis on the law. Sufism wants to emphasize love, the heart. Let me write these movements down, right? So Sufism in Islam, this is the first subversion of the first fight, first quarrel in the Father's house, right? You have Hasidism and wisdom literature, first of all, in Judaism. Already wisdom literature is complaining, right? Wisdom literature and Hasidism are the quarrels taking place in Jewish Father's house. In Christianity, to be honest, I think you have definitely in Christianity, you have the whole, especially I'm thinking more in Catholicism, right? You have convents. I know it sounds crazy, but convents, remember, this is where women were studying to be religious leaders, and convents became spaces of subversion. If you read some of the writings of these nuns, you're like, what the what is happening? They're extremely audacious and rebellious, right? So you have, but this is already the mother's house. I have to think about, anybody know of any quarrel in the Father's house in Christianity? It's not coming to me. is it too young, the religion? Yeah, if you come up with something, let me know, right? I'm very curious to know if there were any quarrels among the men, right? About this emphasis on the law and wanting up. Well, you know what? Christianity is itself a big quarrel, because when you look at, I'm glad I came up with this, right? When you look at the teachings of Jesus, right? Actually, this is in itself a quarrel in the Father's house of Judaism, where Jesus is emphasizing kind of like wisdom literature and kind of like Hasidism, emphasizing love versus the exact, right, application of the law. So you already have Christianity is in itself growing out of a quarrel, right? Sadly, Christianity has long since forgotten all the teachings of Jesus. So we're in a completely different place now, right? But when you had the first emergence of this, of the historical figure of Jesus and the way he taught, this is one huge quarrel right there in the Father's house of Judaism, right? Great. So you have in general, right, emphasis on the law, whether it's Judaism, Islam, and of course Christianity, ever since it's abandoned Jesus, right, has been really focused on, keeping certain commandments. And if we digress, we're sinners, we're going to hell. All of this discourse, right, is a Father's house discourse, which in my view has radically abandoned the crisis that Jesus was trying to create, right? So now when we go to to the mother's house, we have something completely different. And this is where a lot of the rabbis have been stumbling, right? First of all, if you don't have a subversion, you have a complete indifference to social and religious norms, right? Let me say that again, right? Sometimes you have actual rebellion, but in general, it's complete indifference. It's not even that they're trying to rebel against the commandments and I'm going to do my own thing, I'm going to be me. No, indifference. When you read the Song of Songs, she's oblivious to how things are supposed to go between a man and a woman. Complete indifference, right? She's doing her complete own thing without even thinking things through in terms of the law. She's breaking every rule, in fact, we're going to see. Ruth, it's easy. She's not a Hebrew. So has no clue how she's supposed to behave, and she makes a number of serious blunders, actually. We'll notice those, right? But again, she's completely on a different level. She's operating on a different level. And of course, Queen Esther, right, who was first a concubine and then a queen of one of the most cruel kings of Persia, right? There's no mention even of God in that book. In general, by the way, in these books, God is really taking backstage, right? There is no sense of God as having center stage as he does in general, right? He's really largely hidden from sight, right? So that's the first thing we see. Either you have a massive indifference to religious and social norms, and number two, you have a very powerful emphasis on love, right? Or in the Hebrew, especially chesed, which we'll encounter in Ruth, especially, right? So as though we are in a different moral context, a different moral worldview, right? There is the moral context of keeping certain rules, and that makes you moral. But then there's a context which has nothing to do with rules, which is about alignment with your heart, alignment with love, right? With the intention of love. And so this is we call this in Greek, the new ethos, we say, or the new moral context that we are entering. Can't write context, okay? So in this context, and by the way, Sufism, Hasidism, the teachings of Jesus, all of these, how did I call them? These guys, these quarrels, right? They're all saying the same thing, right? We have forgotten the state of the heart. We have become too engrossed in matters of the law, and we have forgotten that ultimately the goal of the law is to teach us to love, right? There's a beautiful saying in Sufism. When I teach on Rumi, we talk about the contrast between Sufism and traditional Islam. And there's a beautiful saying that the law will take you all the way to the palace of the king. Okay, so on this image, what is the palace of the king? Who is the king, do you think, in this story by Sufism? You can put in the chat.
God.
Yeah, very good, right? So the law will get you all the way to the palace, but only love will let you enter, right? So it acknowledges the importance of the law. The law will get you a certain distance, right? But it's not enough. If the law has not developed love in your heart, you can go no further and you're not even going to enter the palace, right? So it's as though if you have just the law and the love hasn't grown, you're just like the pagan over there in the wilderness. You're just as far because you're there, but you can't enter, right? So that's the idea. So this is what we see in these texts. We have an emphasis on love, as though to say that if you have love, you have reached the level that the law was trying to teach. And so in that sense, you can shed the law like a snake, right? Sheds the skin, right, when he has a rebirth, right? So in a way, once you've reached that level, well, let me give you an example with swimming. This will help. Remember how you have to wear these little bubble things? What are they called? When you learn to swim, you have these little, what do you call this?
Floaties.
Floaties, right? So you don't know how to swim, you have floaties, you're trying to swim, right? The day you know how to swim, do you need the floaties? No. That's the idea, right? So the idea of not, by the way, this idea is found in the Father's house in the quarrels, the teachings of Rumi, Sufism, the teachings of wisdom literature that we're doing now, the teachings of Jesus, all agree fundamentally that once you know how to swim, you don't need the floaties. This is how these texts are seeing the law. They're saying once you've reached a state of love, and what's interesting is that all three of these women, that's their journey, right? How to love. Once you reach that state, when you are in that context, when you are journeying in love, right? When you're making that journey to becoming a better lover, you don't need this other stuff, the floaties, right? That would be the argument. There's a saying by Saint Augustine in Christianity. Let me write this down. Very, very powerful saying. This is one of the church fathers. He says, love and do what you want, right? Because if you love, you can pretty much do what you want. You don't need the floaties. You're there. You're where the law wanted you to be, right? So that's already, woo, this is scary, right? We don't want to take off the floaties and just swim, right? But this is what these women are doing. All three of these women are functioning in a world where there are no rules, and yet they're still giving us a pathway to God. How? Because they're tracing in their lives the pathway of love, right? They're looking at life not in terms of this is right, this is wrong, this is moral, this is immoral. They're just thinking, what is the most loving thing to do? That's their moral dilemma. Let me say that again, right? There's two types of people, right? Two types of moral dilemmas, right? Moral dilemma of the Father's house. What's right, what's wrong? What's pure, what's impure? What's allowed, what's transgressive? This is what you're thinking, right? When you're making a moral decision. These women, the only question is this: what's loving, what's not loving? If it's loving, I'm doing it. If it's not loving, I'm not doing it. That's the only moral question they're asking themselves, and that is their moral compass, right? So they don't have a scripture, they don't have do's and don'ts. Their only moral compass is found within, in the, is this a loving thing to do or not, right? Good question, Stage. So the love we're talking about obviously is this is the question, I guess. This is what we'll have to discover in the text. What does it mean to love, right? We don't know, right? We still have to learn, right, from these women, because we haven't really studied these texts, right? We've studied the do's and don'ts, we know that, but we don't, I believe, as a civilization, as a humanity, we have not learned how to love. Why? Because, and I believe the reason we don't know how to love, the reason all our marriages are failing and we're dating and we can't make it work and we have like a 80% divorce rate soon, right? The reason this is happening, we have not been taught how to love. Why? Because the mother's house has not been attended. There, you can quote me on that. The reason we struggle so much, every single one of us, by the way, even if you're married, you're struggling right now, right? You're struggling single, you're struggling married, you're struggling divorced. We are struggling. This is a massive crisis of our time, to quote Martin Buber, right? We do not know how to love. Why? Because we have not frequented the mother's house. We have not studied in the mother's house. We've been too long in the Father's house. So one of the goals of this section, where we'll be sitting in the mother's house, will be really to learn what it is to love, right? So excellent question, stage. Great. Okay. Any questions so far? Let me stop a little bit and take some of your questions before I go further. So I have Kestenbaum and Stage. Go ahead.
So just going back to what you were saying earlier about someone without love can only come to the palace but not actually unlock the gates. So it's funny because the Talmud and the Tractate of Brachot, it uses the exact same analogy, but interestingly, it doesn't say love, it says fear.
Ooh, okay.
Fear doesn't mean like being afraid. It's more of like the commentators explain being in awe of or being in understanding of. But it's just interesting. They use the exact same analogy, but instead it seems that they place an emphasis first on being in awe, which is sort of in Talmudic Judaism, sort of like the first level. And once you have that awe, which in Hebrew is yira, then can you access the ahava, the love.
Nice.
So it's cool. They use the exact same analogy.
Yeah, you remember, right? Islam and Judaism are cousin religions. They have same source, right? So you will have a lot of connections, and they borrow from each other, right? So that's one of the reasons you have. But this is interesting, right? First the awe, then the love. I'm gonna come to this on what the notion, the definition of holiness. We're gonna, when we enter Ruth next time, we're gonna talk about two different concepts of holiness. And I hope I have it. I thought I put it somewhere. Okay, I don't see it in these notes. But excellent. Let's see, who else? Yes, Stage, I thought you had your hand up, and then Granick.
No, I accidentally left it down, but I'll speak anyway. You've mentioned something about Book of Ruth and Book of Song of Songs. Now that it's debatable as to who wrote Song of Songs, but let's not go into that right now. In Song of Songs, the Shulamite did not commit adultery, fornication. Nowhere did anybody commit fornication. The Ruth did not commit fornication. Esther, these are not, you call them lovers. None of this is fornication. They were taken as wives.
So Stage, we haven't yet entered the text, so we don't know what's happening yet.
Oh, okay. No, because you said lovers, and I'm like, they're not lovers. Lovers is fornication.
Ah, yes, we'll get there. We'll get there. Yes, this is a question that, by the way, especially the Song of Songs, I was reading commentaries on it, and 50% say there is no sex, 50% say there is, right? So we'll have to see what we get out, right? We're going to try and read it and come to our own conclusions, but there's a debate on this, right? This is not crystal clear. We're going to see. Granick, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, I just wanted a little clarity. Because like, I guess on the one hand, we're saying that like the purpose of the law is to bring you to love. But then on the other hand, we're saying that's sort of the father's house, and the mother's house is really what brings you to love. So I guess I'm just a little confused.
Yes. So that's in Sufism, right? Remember, Sufism is already a quarrel within the father's house. So of course it's going to talk about love, right? So there are connections between Sufism, the teachings of Jesus, and Hasidism, and the mother's house, right? They're already feeling uncomfortable. So that's why you find that discussion in the father's house. Makes sense? Okay, great. Anything else before I continue and focus on, okay, so let's go now and focus, the focus, right? Of course, we'll talk about these 4 points. It will come up over and over again, but this really gives you an idea of how the mother's house is structured, how things will be in the mother's house. And of course, this class will be focusing on the notion of the sacred marriage, right? That we read in Inanna, right? So I'm gonna go over briefly what we learned in Inanna, because this is the connection I'm making. The concept of the sacred marriage in Inanna is actually found in these 3 texts, right? And the meaning of it, the significations of it, and that's why I made you read a little bit of Inanna, so you could have the backdrop, right? So let's talk a little bit, right? We know already, before I remind you of the sacred marriage in the text of Inanna, if you're familiar with the Hebrew Bible, there is a clear resistance to the goddess religions in the Hebrew Bible, right? There is an awareness of these religions and a resistance, right? Bear in mind that Inanna evolved in time, right? When it was the empire of Sumer, she was Inanna. When the Babylonians took over, she was Ishtar. This is the time of Esther. Notice, is the same name. It is. Esther is actually in the Babylonian Ishtar, right? So she's actually has the name of a goddess. Moving on. Then she became, when the Canaanites populated the land, she became, she had two different faces. She was either Asherah or, where did I put? I wrote it down. What's the other, anybody remember the other name of this goddess in the Hebrew Bible? There's Asherah and Asteret. Oh my God, I
Is it
forgot.
Astoreth or something?
Thank you. That's it, Asteret, right? So these are same, and scholars believe this is the same goddess, right? That is through time, switching names, switching context, and so forth. But it's still this notion of so you have over and over again the prophets in the Hebrew Bible are tearing their hair out over these goddess religions, right? So so it's already problematic that I'm trying to make connections, right? Because there's a clear injunction. There's a clear command to stay away from these religions, right? So why am I, right, making this my starting point, right? That's crazy. So I will explain, right? First of all, we know that these goddess religions were very, very attractive to the women of the time, right? Now, this doesn't excuse them, right? I'm just saying that there was something in the goddess religion which was attractive, which was something that the woman could resonate with, right? So that's on the one hand, doesn't excuse them yet, right? But there is something there. So my belief here in this class, what I'm going to do is to show that actually the elements, make sure you listen carefully, the elements that were attractive in the goddess religions are already in the Hebrew Bible. And so my goal is to, of course, we start with the goddess religions to see what there is to see, and then to find that we already have these positive elements happening within the Hebrew Bible. So whatever these women were attracted to, because it was such a feminine form of worship and so forth, we have in these three texts, the Song of Songs, Ruth, and Esther, right? So there is already in the Hebrew Bible this deeply feminine path to spirituality that the women in the Hebrew Bible were pining after when they were watching the Canaanites do these goddess religions. So what they were sensing was this deeply feminine path to spirituality, which of course was, there were a lot of problems, right? With that, we already saw, one of the main problems that we could see in the worship of Inanna, right, was this notion of the sacred prostitute, right? From what I read, you had, anytime a girl became an adolescent, she was on duty in that temple to be there one night and have one encounter, and then of course she would emerge a woman, which we saw what happened to Inanna. So this is problematic, right? Ethically on many levels, right? So you had a lot of sacred prostitution. You had a lot of, there were, we kind of, today if you read the people who are writing about the goddess religions, they kind of make it look so glamorous. It wasn't. There were some deep, massive issues, with sexual violence, exploitation, and so forth taking place within these goddess religions, right? But there was something that was catchy for the women, right? There was something deeply feminine. And so what I'm trying to do is show that actually the Hebrew Bible offers us, not only does it contain all the elements of the goddess religions, but it offers us even more, right? So what I'm trying to do is begin at the goddess religions and then find how we have these same elements that are attractive already in our text. Are you following me? I don't want nobody call me a pagan at the end of this. Okay, very good. Okay, great. So I want to be very clear, right? I use it as my starting point because they are the lens through which I will look at these texts, Esther, Ruth, and so forth. Okay, so let's talk briefly. Let's review, right? We read the text, we studied them together. That was awesome. That was like one of my best classes. I had such a kick out of listening to your interpretations. By the way, there's one more interpretation I want you to figure out for me if you want to stay after class and tell me. When Dumuzi is sent to the underworld, he rotates with his sister. What does this mean? Psychoanalytically, right? I'm trying to look at what is the symbol, what is it representing, right? And so please think about that and tell me at the end of class if you figured it out, because that's the one thing I forgot to talk about. Okay, so goddess religions, we talked about this last time, originated around 4000 BC in Sumer. This is present-day Iraq. We know already about Sumer from the Tower of Babel, right? Same region, right? The main ritual in that context, in the context of the goddess Inanna, which was the principal goddess at the time, right? Or one of the principal goddesses, right? Was this notion of the sacred marriage between her and Dumuzi, right? Which was enacted every year when the fall came, which for them is like the beginning of the new year. Why? Because you had like summer was considered to be winter for them. It was death. There was nothing could grow in the summer. It was so dry. So when fall came, it was like the rains, the beginning of, harvest and so forth. So for them, the new year, their spring, right? Their spring is in the fall. So every fall, they would celebrate Dumuzi coming out of the underworld and being again united with Inanna. And then from their union comes all of this, right? Fertility in the land, right? This is the harvest time, the rains coming from their union, right? And then when he goes back, paf, winter or summer, right? But really wilderness, barrenness, nothing, right? So they would celebrate every year around the fall. They would celebrate this sacred marriage, and the way it would be celebrated, again, problematic, right? You had a sacred prostitute, you had the king of the land, and they would sleep together one night, and from that union was believed the land would become plentiful and fertile and so forth. The idea that is attractive here is not the exploitation of the sacred prostitutes. The idea that is interesting is the idea that new beginning, renewal, redemption can emerge out of the union of the male and the female. This is the idea that I find interesting and that I find in all three texts. Let me say it again. The interesting idea here. Remember, let me go back to Genesis. Remember Genesis 3:15, Genesis 3:16? Let's review because it's connected. Tell me if you remember what's happening in Genesis 3:15 and Genesis 3:16. Okay, somebody, what's happening in 3:15? Well, how are they connected? Let's review. How are those two texts connected?
Hi. I think for Genesis 3:15, it's when God's talking to the serpent, and he says that like basically the son of like man will like strike your head and you'll bite his heel. And then obviously 3:16 talks about to Eve saying that your husband shall rule over you. Yeah, pretty much like your husband shall rule over you, like your desires should be contrary to his, pretty much.
Okay, right, that's the idea. So we have two redemptive moments. Remember, I really argued that both of these texts are messianic, right? Redemptive. The first one, obviously, referring to this Redeemer that will come and, make the world, like destroy the serpent, deliver us from evil. We have this in Judaism, in Christianity, obviously. It's the main idea, right? And then I showed you how structurally I believe Genesis 3:16 is also a redemptive prophecy, but it has to do with the union of the male and the female, right? And remember, I talked about it not in terms of oppression, right, but of mutual awakening. So this is where we are here, right? We are familiar in the Father's house with the idea of redemption, that there is a Savior going to come and save us. Everybody believes this. Could be just God or messenger from God, doesn't matter, right? In the Father's house, there is a male alone who will come and fix everything, right? That's Genesis 3:15. In the mother's house, we have a different view of redemption. It is the union between the male and the female when it is in perfect balance, right? Which will bring about this renewal, this rejuvenation, and this cosmic redemption, right? Are you following me? This is really important. This is new stuff. Right? Are you seeing the difference between the two different, put your hand on the screen if you're following me. Okay, so different view of redemption. So what I find interesting in the goddess religion of Inanna is that there is this awareness that the union of the male and the female has tremendous power of renewal, not only for the female, not only for the male, but for the world. This is, make sure you write this down, this is the center of what we're going to be studying in Ruth and Esther in the Song of Songs. This idea that the union between the male and the female, the sexual union, by the way, right? This implies sexuality, which normally is kind of, very, very, in the father's house, sexuality is not spoken of. Right? But here in the mother's house, sexuality is actually seen, the sexual union between the male and the female is actually what is going to transform the woman, transform the man, but not only that, transform the cosmos, right? There is an effect which when Dumutsi and Inanna come together, right, symbolically every fall, and the result of this union is the renewal of the land. This is exactly this is the thing we see in the Shulamit, in the Song of Songs, in the Book of Esther, in the Book of Ruth. All three texts, in my view, are playing out this drama. Are you seeing what I'm saying? This is important, right? All three texts have in them a dimension of the sacred marriage which renews the man, the woman, and the world. So this is a different view on the Messianic era, different view on the redemption of the world, right? Not brought out by a warrior figure who crushes the snake, right, like Gilgamesh, but is brought out by the sacred union between the man and the woman. And the idea is that if we can reach this state of balance, this is me going further, right? I'm following here in the footsteps of the philosopher Irigaray, who is strangely with whom I'm in tune here in this context. She's saying, right, when we reach a state of balance between the male and the female, we will reach civilization, right? Or we will reach this moment of redemption. So this is where we're headed, right? So that's the main idea. So the story in Inanna that concerns us is the story of her sacred marriage to Dumutsi, right? And the celebration that is enacted every year. And remember, right? Notice that in the text that we read, right? She is awakened by him, right? She is watered. She uses the term of being watered by him in the sense that she is in a way, right, blossoming. And he is renewed by her. She is the one who empowers him to become the king of the land, right? So there is a powerful effect that they have on each other. And then, of course, the whole land benefits. Okay, any questions on this notion of the sacred marriage and how we will be encountering it throughout our texts? Granik, go ahead. Granik, go ahead.
Definitely no, kind of just a preliminary question, but I guess, hear me?
Not good. Yeah, you frozen a little bit.
Like, why is the yeah? Okay, forget it. Yeah, don't worry.
I'm frozen too. Oh, here I am. Oh my God, I almost died. Okay, why don't you put it in the chat, Brannick, and I'll respond to you in the chat. Let me put that. Yeah, I hope you heard me. Any other questions while we wait for Brannick to unfreeze? Okay, great. Okay, good. So, good. I think I covered most of what I wanted to cover. I went too fast. I went too fast. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so guys, we have time. So if anybody has questions or wants clarifications on anything I said, this is the moment. Otherwise, we can call it a day. King, go ahead.
Can we throw gay marriage into the mix and see if things still hold?
Oh my God. Okay, wait. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Can you ask that question again, King?
Does the powerful union still hold if it's between a man and a man or a woman and a woman?
Yeah, so let me explain. This is a good question, right? Why is the Bible so heteronormative, right? This has been an issue for a very long time. And I think I've come up with some kind of decent explanation, right? In other words, not an explanation based on, they're sinful, they should go to hell, all of them, right? The reason why there's such an emphasis on the male-female relationship in the Hebrew Bible is because this is the relationship which is the most challenging, because they're so different. Not only, right, in a gay partnership, you have differences, obviously, individual differences, cultural differences, but in the heterosexual relationship, you have also gender difference, which makes the relationship extremely complicated and difficult. And the reason why it's emphasized is that for them, this is the ultimate relationship with the other, right? The Hebrew Bible, if you haven't noticed yet, is all about moving beyond yourself towards another. We see this with Abraham, the Tower of Babel, and so forth, with Adam and Eve, right? This is the thrust of the Hebrew Bible, is to constantly move towards the other. Why? Because God is the ultimate other, right? So they privilege it, right? I would say, if I want to just stay very neutral about it, I would say that the Hebrew Bible privileges it for this reason, right? So that's as far as I'll go. And does that make sense, King? Does that answer a little bit why there's at least the heteronormative aspect of the Hebrew Bible?
Yeah, everything sounds sound. So yeah, that makes sense, I think.
Right. So, of course, we have moments in the Hebrew Bible which are prohibitive with regards to homosexuality. But there's a lot of scholarship today which is trying to show that the prohibition is not so much against the same-sex partnership, but against the context, which was a context of violation, context of war. So there's a lot of scholarship which is arguing that the issue is not the same sex, the issue is the violence associated with the act at the time, right? So that's interesting scholarship. I don't think the Hebrew Bible. Yeah, I think I prefer to look at it in terms of an emphasis. Hebrew Bible emphasizes that particular relationship because for it, it's the most complex, difficult, other, right? There's the most otherness in this relationship, and that's why it's symbolizing the relationship between us and God, right? There is not much else, doesn't say too much apart from these few passages which prohibit, which again commentators are showing today. Some commentators are showing that maybe they are prohibited because of the context of violence, not so much because of the context of same-sex, right? But this is still in debate. We haven't yet resolved, I believe, the issue of homosexuality, and it's difficult to resolve it. It's still being discussed, which is good, right? Remember, I really for me, it is extremely important that when a text becomes oppressive, that we go back to the text and find ways for it to become redemptive. So if a given text is used as a source of oppression, I believe we are misinterpreting the text. We're misreading the text. We are misusing the text, right? And so the duty for the interpreter, when they realize my interpretation is oppressing a whole social group, right? The duty is to go back and to find ways to read it in a way that is redemptive and not oppressive. This is the challenge that I would give biblical commentators. It's too easy to say, oh, the Bible clearly says. First of all, there's nothing clear in the Bible, right? You're not from the Bible, so it's not clear. You don't know Hebrew most of the time, right? It's not clear, right? Number two, right? The Bible doesn't clearly say anything, right? You have to go and intelligently interpret, right? So my challenge to biblical commentators and to religious leaders is to really read the text and make it into something redemptive, which is the purpose of the text. As soon as it becomes oppressive, you're doing something wrong. Go back, right? That's my challenge. So for now, I haven't read yet satisfactory exegesis about homosexuality in the Hebrew Bible on either side. It's not clear to me, right? We are not making enough efforts. We need to work harder. Okay, great. Let's not get hung up on this, please. I can see. Thank you, King. Moving on. Pierre-Antoine.
Okay. I just, like, you said something which made me think it might be a dumb question, especially since we're focusing on the Hebrew goddesses or whatever. But so you say the Hebrew Bible focuses on the otherness and when it comes to heteronormative relationships. But if saying for instance God wants to focus on otherness, right? Why is all his reiterations, I don't know the correct word for it, but his embodiment throughout the Bible, like Boaz or Joseph or so on and so forth, why are they all male? Why isn't it it's given through a female besides Esther and Ruth and so forth and so on?
So two things, right? First of all, there are a lot of female metaphors, right? Even in the Father's house, we have female metaphors, right? Number two, remember the Bible was redacted by men, right? So we are lucky given that men were in charge of everything, that there are a few texts that emerged as oddballs, right? So this shows us that whoever was, whoever those men were who were putting together the religion, they were broad enough, they were intelligent enough, right, to be able to include the mother's house, right? But the reason you have such an emphasis is because clearly the Bible written, taught, interpreted by men, and so obviously it leans in that direction. But it's for me, it's extraordinary that within a patriarchal religion you have these moments of breaking out, right? So that tells me that whoever wrote, compiled, commented the Bible were able to transcend their culture and intuit more, right? And even include, right, perhaps even women authors, female authors, right? There's speculation that Ruth and the Song of Songs must have been written by women. We don't know, of course, but because of the knowledge of women's norms and women's psyche, right? People's commentators have speculated that perhaps even we have female authors, right? But yeah, of course it leans that way because of the patriarchy, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah, because it just made me think, but okay.
Yeah, no, that was a good question. Pierre-Antoine, there are no dumb questions, and especially not from you. So you're good. Okay, let's see. Kastenbaum, go ahead.
I just have a question about our test. When you go to the grade section on Blackboard, I'm pretty sure that's outdated. It's like 2 homeworks and 1 test from 3 people.
Yeah, I haven't done it yet. It's a template. Yeah.
All right.
Did I write you? Yeah, I mentioned the test. Maybe I can talk about this briefly. Well, let me save it a little bit, unless there's one more question, because we still have a little time. So I'll talk.
Okay.
I'll talk about it. That's a good, very good observation. Okay, I don't see any questions. All right, let's talk about your test. So the test was, it was okay. I guess the issue for me was not so much you as me. I was frustrated because when it got to the reflective part, I didn't feel you had enough room to develop because I kind of put them together, which was stupid of me. So I'm going to split it up next time. I prefer to have a normal test question based on the lectures, just the lectures, just rehash, right? Just spit out what we talked about in class. That way I can see you're following. And then I want to give you more space, a few more pages to reflect deeply on how this class is impacting you. So there will be 2. You might think, oh no, this is double the work. It is, but the grade is easier to get a good grade when I do just a straightforward test question. Those of you who took my classes in upper level, let's see, Delmas, can you testify how difficult it is when I don't do a test question?
I can testify.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Right, it is much more difficult when I do like the kind of reflection question I gave you. The test question is straightforward. You don't have to think. You just drag the information from the lecture, and then you have a kind of very fluid personal reflection. So it will be actually much easier to get an A than if I keep it the other way. So it's a little more work, but it's actually easier grade. Make sense, Kestenbaum? Yeah. So that's what we'll do next time. So this time I counted, like everybody, I made pass fail. It's like everybody who did the test got credit. I just have some warning for some of you. Some of you are not bringing enough of the lectures and it will show up, right, in the next test. So be careful, right? As we get into the next test, you want to make sure you take very good notes here. Basically, every word comes out of my mouth should be on your paper. Does that make sense? That's how it is. So it's a different style. We're in Europe in this classroom. European style, where I'm saying, I'm speaking pretty fast. There's not this ridiculous PowerPoint behind me. And you kind of have to follow, right? So you will have to learn to, take as many. So the best way to prepare for the next test is to make sure your notes are hyper detailed, right? Before I go to Alim's question, I just want to, some of you were late, what we're going to do next time, because the syllabus is fluid. So next time I will introduce Ruth. There's no reading assignment, but I still would like you to read the whole book of Ruth. It's only 4 chapters. You read it so you're aware, right? And then we'll go into your questions. We'll do that in the reading assignments. So Alim, go ahead.
So when I was doing the test, like when I take notes, I also take notes on like the things that you like answer to people's questions. So like when I was like doing mine, I was like, oh, like which things are like relevant to put in the test and like which things are not.
Well, safest answer is whatever you feel is coming out of my notes. That's what has to go in, right? So make sure when you can sense, right, when I'm asking a question or when I'm answering a question and when I'm actually lecturing from the notes. So that's for sure has to be in the test. Then you can add, right? Especially if I'm jumping over, about somebody's, comment, then yes, you can add. But for sure, you need to have the notes. Does that make sense, Aline? Does that help? Basically, Aline, you took a class with me before, which was philosophy of religion, like that, right? Whatever you did in philosophy of religion, that's how you do this. Okay, any other questions? Cool, wonderful. Okay, guys, we'll call it a day. Let me stop the recording.